In this chapter, it talked about the regulations of securities as well as the numerous acts that came along with it. This chapter also discussed state security laws and touched on e-commerce regulations. Diving in, it started off with the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act of 2010. It stated it sought to prevent further occurrences of problems faced by the United States between 2008 and 2010. It was oversaw by regulatory agencies, involved risk-taking, provisions on executive compensation, credit rating agencies, and derivatives. Moving on, it talked about the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, which included corporate accountability, new accounting regulations, and criminal penalties. Another act that was brought up was the Security Acts of 1933, which had full disclosure decisions, registration statements, and processes, and it had disclosure requirements to identify users. However, there were a few exemptions, and those included private placement, intrastate offering, as well as small businesses and other offering exemptions. Then it gave a definition of security, which is defined as a stock, bond, or any other instrument of interest. Closing out the chapter, it talked about the state security laws, which are known as blue sky laws and are similar to federal laws. And then how I related this back to everyday life was by saying the Security and Exchange Commission is trying its best to increase transparency and trust in the U.S. stock market. And this chapter talked about the SEC. Moving into chapter 24, this chapter covered the ins and outs of antitrust laws. This included the Sherman and Clayton Acts, as well as the enforcement and exemptions that came with the laws. Quick introduction to antitrust laws. Trust was business arrangement in which owners of stocks in several companies place their securities with trustees. To describe the enforcements, it was the Justice Department, Federal Trade Commission, private parties, and then same thing with the exemptions. To break it down, it was regulated industries, labor unions, intrastate activities, agricultural activities, baseball. I thought that was very interesting. City activities and oil marketing. I thought that one was interesting as well. Moving on to the Sherman Act of 1890, it was a combination, contract, or a conspiracy of an act that required the presence of an agreement or a collision. However, the Clayton Act of 1914 prohibited price discrimination or exclusive dealing agreements, as well as corporate mergers. So those two differed. And then closing out that chapter, it talked about other antitrust statutes. This included the Federal Trade Commission Act of 1914. Excuse me. This prohibited unfair methods of competition, and then it also consisted of the Bank Merger Act of 1966. And this stated all bank mergers must be approved in advance by banking agencies that have jurisdiction. And then to wrap this up, it relates to everyday life by saying antitrust laws are ensuring that fair competition exists in an open market economy, even today.